Thank you, Shelley, and thank you. I'm Terry Fallis. I write novels, and I'm very pleased to be here in this great city exploring this important question, and I commend the organizers for choosing a date that does not conflict with a Habs playoff game. Well played, Team Walrus. Tonight you are going to be hearing from a fascinating, diverse, and gifted cast of very serious thinkers. I'll also be speaking. Storytelling, wrong button. Storytelling, neuroscience, and cities. I'm not actually sure that I can tie together these three seemingly disparate strands without pulling my groin, but I'm going to try. Storytelling is an ancient art, perhaps the oldest of them all. It actually predates language. The clearest evidence we have of this are the 40,000-year-old cave paintings that can be found in various parts of the globe. The paintings often depict the gory glory of the hunt. At this time, there simply were no words to convey the stories. Then and now, pictures tell stories very well. If we move through the centuries, we come to Egyptian hieroglyphics, a different language all of its own. Again, pictures effectively describing everyday life, this time in ancient Egypt. Finally, language emerged, and along with it, a physical means of capturing and crystallizing stories. Initially, words were quite literally etched in stone, making the editing process for ancient novelists quite taxing. Then society took a great leap forward when Johannes Gutenberg blessed us with movable type around 1439. All of a sudden, books that had previously been in the exclusive domain of the uber-rich and the religious elite were now reaching a much broader audience as the oral tradition and the written word became storytelling's 1-2 punch. Books proliferated and storytelling was, in some ways, democratized. There are some who believe that storytelling is embedded in how humans think. Some claim that an inclination to storytelling is actually part of our DNA, that it's actually written into our genetic code. All right, I seem to be feeling the need for a segue here. In fact, some people contend that the human brain is actually hardwired for storytelling, and by some people, I mean leading neuroscientists across the globe who tend to know their way around the cerebellum, the temporal, frontal, occipital, and parietal lobes, not to mention the medulla oblongata. Okay, maybe I was showing off a bit there. My father is a doctor. But it is true. Science has now provided the hardcore evidence that justifies the intuitive understanding that writers have always had about the power of storytelling. We like stories. Well, here's what neuroscientists have recently discovered. When we take in information and tuck it away for future reference in our brains, it penetrates deeper, is retained longer, and is most easily recalled if that information enters our brain in the form of a story. In other words, we don't file information in our brains as data points or as facts or as statistics. We like to file it by story. This is not just some twisted conspiracy devised by a megalomaniacal storyteller bent on world domination. These are the well-supported, evidence-based findings of leading neuroscientists that scientifically confirm the primacy of storytelling. Let me step back and explain why I think this revelation is significant. Before I wrote novels, I had another career. In fact, I still do, I say with some regret. For nearly 30 years, I've been a communications consultant in the agency world. I co-founded an agency in 1995 where I still work at least 4 days a week so I can afford to be a Canadian novelist on the 5th day. A staple in our business and an elemental component of effective communications has been something that we call key messages. They tend to underpin all external communications. It's standard operating procedure in the communications world, in my world. Well, neuroscientists have just rocked that world. So what does this really mean? Well, it means that key messages, those short, pithy, fact-filled sentences, should no longer dominate. Excuse me. No, if you want to entrench a message in the minds of the listener, the viewer, the reader, tell them a story. By all means, include the key message points, but wrap them in stories. Drive them through a narrative voice, because your audience will understand it more easily, think about it longer, and be able to gain access to it in the future because we've told them a story. So the building blocks of effective communications, previously thought to be our much vaunted so-called key messages, should actually be stories. So we move from key message-based communications to narrative-based communications or story-based communications. So instead of saying the Chevy Impala gets 35 miles per gallon, all hail the key message, it would be better to say something like, we piled the family into the Chevy Impala in Toronto and drove all the way to Montreal, and we still had gas in the tank when we arrived at the Bell Centre to see the Leafs play the Habs. You'll note that I didn't say to see the Leafs beat the Habs. That would be storytelling of a different kind. So let's learn from what we've been doing for centuries already. Effective communications is rooted in storytelling, which, as I feel my groin straining, brings us to cities. Montreal is more than a collection of facts and stats. It's a 373-year-old source of stories that have defined this city. Stories of neighborhoods from the time of Montreal's birth, stories from major events that have shaped this city in the past, stories of heroes past, of heroes present, stories even of Montreal's future. And what a time this is for telling stories. Storytellers have so many more ways to tell stories than we've ever had before. Sure, you can still write books, and I remain a fan of that particular medium, but there's radio, there's film, there's television, there's the internet's almost limitless storytelling potential, there's music and theater and dance and so much more. So unleash the artists, the writers, the bloggers, the podcasters, the filmmakers, the songwriters, the playwrights, the choreographers, and everybody else, anybody else, to tell this city's stories. This will breathe life into the city because, simply put, we love stories. We always have, and we always will. So let's learn from the neuroscientists and 40,000 years of storytelling history, from the cave paintings to Mordecai Richler. How do you animate a city? Just tell its stories.